Doctor Who Season by Season. Season 24 Review. Season 24 is another of the most divisive of all Doctor Who seasons, and a season that is often put up there as the worst of Doctor Who, at least for the original series. But does it deserve this reputation? Well, yes and no. That Season 24 has problems is unsurprising given the behind-the-scenes chaos the program was in at the time. Script editor Eric Saward had left the series in acrimonious circumstances during the previous season, and producer John Nathan Turner had been forced by BBC management, against his own wishes, to carry out the firing of Colin Baker. The cheek of this is extraordinary. The gutless donks interfering in the running of a show to fire the lead actor, but then don't have the balls to tell the guy himself, and insist that the news be given to him by a man who didn't want to do it anyway. The other twist to this tale was dangling a carrot in front of JNT, who had been trying to get off the show for several years now, that giving Colin the bad news would be his last act as producer and he would finally be moved on to something else. Then, at literally the 11th hour, JNT found himself called back into his boss's office and told he would have to produce the next season after all. Thus, with less than half the usual production time, JNT had to set about not just setting up an entire new season, but finding a new script editor and a new doctor to boot. He did so, hiring Andrew Cartmel and Sylvester McCoy respectively, both of whom were then literally thrown into one hell of a baptism of fire, with neither having any time to so much as take a breath before production kicked off. That Season 24 is a bit of a mess under these circumstances is pretty inevitable. That much of it is actually still entertaining is perhaps the most surprising thing. The first story of the season is Time and the Rani, which is also the worst of the season, the worst McCoy story and pretty much the worst post-regeneration New Doctor story ever. JNT commissioned the story from Pip and Jane Baker prior to the hiring of Cartmel, simply because they had shown themselves the previous season to be reliable writers who could churn out a script in record time. Originally it was going to be Colin Baker's regeneration story, but when Col told the Beeb to go fuck themselves for their egregiously unprofessional behavior, it was redrafted to be Sylv's debut. Andrew Cartmel apparently hated the script, but there was little to be done about it at such a late stage. It's a mess of a story, deeply embarrassing in every respect, and even Sylvester sadly does not make the best impression, with a terrible script and clearly uncertain at times. Things improve a little with the next story, Paradise Towers. This is still an undeniably very silly story, albeit with dark overtones that would probably have been handled more seriously a season later, but it's quite fun and definitely has the feel of a fresh take on the show starting. Sylvester is also clearly finding his feet here. While the Seventh Doctor is still not the character he would become in seasons 25 and 26, he is clearly growing in confidence in leaps and bounds and is funny, likable and charming throughout. Delta and the Bannerman is also enjoyable fun. A 1950s B-movie parody set to 50s rock and roll, it's fast-paced and entertaining, if still very silly. Sylvester is great again, Sarah Griffiths makes a great what-if companion, Don Henderson plays the villain dead straight, and even Bonnie Langford comes across as naturalistic and likable here. Dragonfire ends the season on a high note. An underrated story despite winning the DWM season poll back in the day. In some ways this feels like the real beginning of the McCoy era, with the departure of Mel and the arrival of the Seventh Doctor's defining companion, Ace, as well as adopting a slightly more serious tone that would become more pronounced the season later. Is it the worst season of Doctor Who, or even Classic Who? To be honest, no. Personally, I vastly prefer it to the previous season, which was clearly the product of a tired production team deeply confused as to the direction of the program. Season 24, for all its undoubted flaws, breathes new life and energy into the program, as well as new ideas and new enthusiasm, even if those ideas and energy is not yet being used to its proper full potential. I don't deny that I have a certain nostalgic affection for Season 24. It is the first full season of the show that I ever saw as a new fan, and while today I can see its problems, at the time, as a kid, I loved every moment of it. For all of that nostalgia and the badly needed new direction the program takes on from this point, I give season 24 a C-.